The first time I met my husband's family, his mother looked me up and down like I had just crawled out from under a rock. I was wearing a thrifted blouse I had found at a secondhand store and a pair of simple flats that I had owned for 3 years. She was wearing Chanel, head to toe. Her eyes moved from my worn shoes to my plain bag, and I saw something flicker across her face. Disgust, maybe, or pity. I wasn't sure which was worse. I extended my hand to shake hers, and she took it like she was touching something dirty. Her fingers were cold and limp. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. My husband, James, stood beside me, grinning like everything was perfect. He squeezed my hand and introduced me as his girlfriend. I smiled back at his mother, even though my stomach was in knots. I told myself it didn't matter what she thought. I told myself I was enough. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I didn't say a word back then. I just smiled and nodded. But I wouldn't stay silent forever. At our engagement party, his aunt cornered me near the dessert table. She had this fake smile plastered on her face, the kind that looked friendly but felt sharp. She tilted her head and asked me, in the sweetest voice, if I was the girl from catering. I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. Her eyes were serious. She really thought I was hired help. I told her no, I was the bride. She blinked a few times then said, "Oh, just that. Oh." She walked away without another word. I stood there holding a plate of cheese and crackers, feeling my face burn. James was across the room, laughing with his college buddies. He hadn't heard a thing. Or maybe he had, and he just didn't care. I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk out and never come back. But I didn't. I told myself it was just one night. Just survive the wedding, I thought. Then things will change. I swallowed the insult like bitter medicine and kept smiling. We got married in a beautiful stone chapel that his family paid for. Everything was elegant and expensive, from the flowers to the champagne. I felt like I was floating through someone else's wedding. At the reception, his sister stood up to give a toast. She raised her glass and talked about how happy she was for her brother. Then she leaned over to me while everyone was clapping and whispered in my ear. "Smart girl," she said. "You really secured the bag." I froze. My smile stayed on my face, but inside, I felt like I had been slapped. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and looked down at my hands. My wedding ring felt heavy. All night, I felt like I was pretending. Pretending to be happy. Pretending to belong. My hands shook every time I picked up my glass. James kissed me in front of everyone, and they all cheered. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just walked into a trap. After the wedding, I kept my job as a high school counselor. I loved that job. I loved helping kids figure out their futures, listening to their problems, and guiding them through the hard parts of growing up. But his family never asked what I did. Not once. They just assumed I stayed home and took care of the house. At family dinners, they would ask James about his work. He was a financial analyst at a big firm downtown. They hung on his every word. But when I tried to talk about my day, they would smile politely and change the subject. It was like I was invisible. Or worse, like I didn't matter. I started to feel smaller and smaller every time I was around them. But I kept going to work. I kept showing up for my kids at school. And little did they know, that job would lead me somewhere powerful. Somewhere they never saw coming. Every Sunday, we had dinner at his parents' house. It was a tradition, James said. I called it torture. His mother would set the table with fine china and crystal glasses, and I would sit there feeling like a fraud. I started bringing dessert, just to contribute something. One Sunday, I brought a homemade apple pie. I had spent hours on it. His mother took one look at it and asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Did you bake this? Or did you buy it with his credit card?" The table went quiet. Then his father chuckled. His sister smirked. James looked down at his plate and said nothing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the pie in her face. But I didn't. I just smiled and said I baked it. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. Every Sunday felt like a silent war. And every Sunday I lost a little more of myself. James loved me. I knew that. He told me all the time. He brought me flowers and held my hand and kissed me goodnight. But he never stood up for me. Not once. Not when his mother made her comments. Not when his sister rolled her eyes at me. Not when his aunt mistook me for the help. He would just laugh it off, like it was all a joke. Like I was being too sensitive. And maybe I was. Maybe I was overreacting. But it hurt. It hurt so much. I started to wonder if love was enough. If love without protection, without defense, without a voice, was really love at all. And the longer he stayed quiet, the louder they got. The insults became sharper. The looks became colder. And I started to realize that I was on my own. I had to protect myself because no one else was going to do it for me. After 6 years as a school counselor, I decided to make a change. I loved working with kids, but I needed something more. Something that would challenge me. Something that would prove to myself and maybe to them that I was more than they thought I was. I started looking into corporate human resources. It was a steep learning curve. I had to learn new systems, new languages, new ways of thinking. But I was determined. One of my former students, a girl I had helped get into college years ago, worked at a private logistics company. She told me they were hiring. She put in a good word for me. A month later, I got the call. I was terrified. But I said yes. That one referral, that one connection, changed everything. I didn't know it yet, but that job was going to give me the power I never knew I needed. The company I joined was unique. It was a private logistics firm, but it was owned by a nonprofit trust. That trust managed donations and endowments for dozens of organizations. Some of them were small local charities. Others were huge, family-run foundations with millions of dollars. I started in a mid-level HR role, handling employee relations and benefits. But I quickly realized that this organization had ties everywhere, including to a foundation that had my in-laws' name on it. I saw it in a list of partner organizations one day and nearly choked on my coffee. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Of course, they didn't know I worked there. They never asked about my job. They never cared. But I knew. And that knowledge sat in my chest like a secret waiting to explode. I told myself to stay calm, to stay quiet. For now, I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I stayed late. I came in early. I asked questions and learned everything I could. My boss noticed. Within 9 months, I was promoted. Then, 6 months after that, I was promoted again. I moved from employee relations to strategic planning. I started sitting in on board meetings. I started making recommendations that actually mattered. My voice, the one that had been silenced at Sunday dinners, was being heard. And people listened. While his family laughed at my shoes and whispered about my background, I was being groomed for decision-making roles. I was being trusted with budgets and policies and futures. And the best part? They had no idea. None of them knew what I was becoming. And I liked it that way. I was rising quietly, like a storm building just beneath the surface. For our 5th wedding anniversary, we decided to host a party at our house. James thought it would be nice to invite his family and show them how far we had come. I wasn't sure it was a good idea, but I agreed. I wanted to keep the peace. I cooked for 2 days. I decorated. I made everything perfect. His family came dressed like they were attending a gala. His mother wore pearls. His sister wore designer heels. They walked through our modest home like they were touring a museum of failure. At one point, his sister raised her glass and made a joke. She said, "Here's to Erin and her early retirement plan." Everyone laughed. James laughed. I stood there holding a tray of appetizers, my face burning. That night, after everyone left, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just got very, very quiet. Something inside me had shifted. I was done trying to win them over. I was done trying to belong. Later that night, after I had cleaned up the mess and put everything away, I asked James why he didn't defend me. Why he never stood up for me when his family made their jokes. He was getting ready for bed, pulling off his tie, and he just sighed. He looked tired. Annoyed, even. He said, "It's just their way, Erin. They don't mean anything by it. Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally." Those words hit me like a punch. How could I not take it personally? It was my life. My dignity. My worth. I stood there in our bedroom, staring at him, and I realized something. He wasn't going to change. He wasn't going to protect me. And if I wanted things to be different, I was going to have to do it myself. That moment felt like the end of something I had tried too hard to keep alive. It felt like a door closing. And on the other side, I was alone. The following week, I got an email at work that made my hands go cold. It was from my boss. The subject line read, "Strategic HR Review Opportunity." I opened it slowly, my stomach twisting. The email explained that one of the foundations connected to our trust needed a full review. They wanted to assess staff performance, donor impact, financial efficiency, and program outcomes. My boss said I was the perfect person for the job. She recommended me to the board. I scrolled down to see which foundation it was. And there it was. The name I knew so well. The foundation that bore my in-laws' family name. The one his mother sat on the board of. The one his sister worked for. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. I nearly dropped my coffee. This wasn't just an opportunity. This was fate handing me the keys to everything. A few days later, I met with the board chair, a woman named Margaret. She was kind and sharp, with silver hair and a no-nonsense attitude. We sat in a conference room with big windows that overlooked the city. She told me that many old money trusts get too comfortable. They stop innovating. They stop measuring impact. They just keep doing things the way they've always done them. She said she wanted fresh eyes. She wanted someone who wasn't afraid to ask hard questions. She looked at me and asked, "Do you have ideas?" I smiled. I had plenty. I told her I believed in accountability, in transparency, in making sure every dollar actually helped someone. She nodded, leaning back in her chair. "Good," she said. "Then let's shake things up." I left that meeting feeling like I was walking on air. This was my chance. Not for revenge. For justice. Over the next few weeks, I was given full access to everything. Financial records. Internal staff surveys. Donor impact reports. I spent hours combing through spreadsheets and reading reports. I took notes. I highlighted inconsistencies. And then I found it. The foundation tied to my in-laws' family had some of the worst performance metrics I had ever seen. Donations were being mismanaged. Grants were going to programs with little to no measurable impact. Staff morale was low. Donor retention was dropping. And guess which family fund was at the center of it all? I sat back in my chair, staring at the numbers on my screen. Every receipt. Every mistake. Every shady decision. It was all in my hands now. And they had no idea. I didn't ask for this. I didn't go looking for revenge. But the universe had handed me the tools, and I wasn't going to waste them. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. My mother-in-law's beloved charity, the one she loved to brag about at dinner parties, had been mismanaging grants for years. Money that was supposed to go towards school meal programs was being redirected. And his sister? She was on the payroll. Her salary, a generous one, was coming directly from donor funds. It wasn't illegal. Technically, everything was above board. But it was disgusting. It was wrong. These were people who pretended to care about helping others, who wore their charity work like a badge of honor, and they were profiting from it. I printed out the reports and stacked them neatly on my desk. I didn't feel angry. I felt cold. Focused. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about doing what was right. And if it happened to hurt them in the process, well, maybe that was just karma finally catching up. A month into the review, the board asked me to lead a restructuring proposal. They wanted me to present a plan for improving efficiency and impact. And they made it clear that I had the power to recommend shutting down or replacing underperforming programs. I sat in that meeting, nodding along, and inside, I felt like I was glowing. This was it. This was the moment. I didn't have to sabotage them. I didn't have to lie or cheat or play dirty. All I had to do was tell the truth. Present the facts. Show the numbers. And let the board make the decision. I wasn't asking for revenge. I didn't need to. The truth was damning enough. I went home that night and sat on the couch, staring at nothing. James asked me if I was okay. I told him I was fine. Great, actually. He didn't ask any more questions. He never did. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. I came home from work glowing. I smiled more. I stood taller. James noticed. One evening, he asked me why I seemed so happy lately. I was cooking dinner, stirring pasta, and I just shrugged. Long day, I said. He didn't push. He just kissed my forehead and went to watch TV. He had no idea that his family's little charity, the one they loved to flaunt, was now under my review. He had no idea that I was the one holding their future in my hands. And I wasn't going to tell him. Not yet. I wanted to savor this. I wanted to enjoy the quiet power of knowing something they didn't. For years, they had made me feel small, invisible, worthless. Now, I was the one in control. And they didn't even see me coming. 2 months later, I received a formal invitation in my work email. The foundation was hosting its annual gala. It was a big event. High-profile donors, politicians, business leaders. Everyone who was anyone in the nonprofit world would be there. And I was listed as a guest speaker. My name was right there on the program. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. This was real. This was happening. And guess who else would be there? My in-laws. All of them. His mother. His father. His sister. They would all be in the audience when I took the stage. I printed the invitation and tucked it into my bag. I didn't tell James right away. I wanted to see his reaction when he found out on his own. I wanted to watch his face when he realized that I wasn't just his quiet, overlooked wife anymore. A few days before the gala, James found the program sitting on the kitchen counter. I had left it there on purpose. He picked it up, frowning, and flipped through the pages. Then he stopped. His eyes went wide. "Why are you speaking at my family's foundation event?" he asked. I was making coffee, my back to him, and I just shrugged. "Work stuff," I said casually. He stared at me. "What do you mean, work stuff?" I turned around and smiled. "I'm leading a strategic review for the foundation. Didn't I mention it?" He looked confused. Shocked even. "No, you didn't." I took a sip of my coffee. "Oh, well, now you know." He didn't say anything else. But I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was starting to realize that I wasn't the same woman he had married. I had changed. And he had no idea how much. The night of the gala, I wore a sleek black dress. Nothing flashy. No designer labels. Just simple, elegant, and confident. I did my makeup carefully. I straightened my hair. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. I looked powerful. When we arrived at the venue, James's family was already there. His mother was holding court near the bar, surrounded by donors. His sister was laughing with a group of women in expensive gowns. They saw me walk in, and I watched their faces change. Confusion. Surprise. And then, when the MC took the stage and said, "Please welcome our strategic review lead, Erin Walters," their jaws dropped. I walked up to the microphone, my heels clicking on the polished floor, and I smiled. They had no words, but I had the mic, and I was ready to use it. I didn't name names. I didn't throw punches. I didn't need to. I simply presented the facts. I talked about the importance of accountability in nonprofit work. I showed slides with data, wasted funds, poor metrics, programs with no measurable impact. I spoke calmly and clearly, my voice steady. The room was silent. People were listening. Really listening. I could see my mother-in-law's face from the stage. She was pale, stiff. Her hands were clenched in her lap. I ended my speech with a quiet smile. "This is where we say goodbye to old models," I said, "and hello to a future built on integrity." The applause was thunderous. People stood up. They clapped and nodded and smiled at me. I stepped off the stage feeling lighter than I had in years. I had told the truth, and the truth had set me free. The board meeting happened the following week. I presented my full report. I walked them through every detail, every red flag, every wasted dollar. And then I made my recommendation. Non-renewal of 3 legacy funds. Programs that were no longer effective, that were no longer serving their mission. My in-laws program was one of them. I spoke clearly and professionally. I answered every question. And when the vote came, the motion passed. Unanimously. I sat there, my hands folded on the table, and I felt nothing but calm. I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't have to fight or argue or beg. The numbers spoke louder than I ever could. And just like that, their legacy was over. The program that bore their name, the one they had built their reputation on, was canceled. And I was the one who did it. The fallout was immediate. My mother-in-law was removed from her honorary board seat. The foundation issued a polite but final press release thanking her for her years of service. His sister lost her position. The entire family was in chaos. James got a text from his mother that night. I saw it light up his phone. "Did your wife do this?" I didn't say anything. I just sipped my tea and waited. He looked at me, his face pale. "Erin," he said quietly. "Did you?" I met his eyes. "I did my job," I said. "I told the truth. That's all." He stared at me for a long time. Then he put his phone down and walked out of the room. I sat there in the silence, feeling the weight of what I had done. And I didn't regret a single second of it. They had called me worthless. They had called me a gold digger. And now, they had nothing. The next Sunday, we went to family brunch. I didn't want to go, but James insisted. He said we had to face them. When we walked in, the room went cold. His mother was sitting at the head of the table, her face tight and angry. She didn't stand up. She didn't hug us. She just stared. We sat down and no one spoke. The tension was suffocating. Finally, she looked at me. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. "You destroyed us," she said. Her voice cracked. "You ruined everything we built." I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her and said, "You always thought I came for the gold." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Turns out I brought it. The table went silent. No one moved. No one spoke. James stared at his plate. His sister looked away. And his mother just sat there, her mouth open, speechless. I finished my tea, and then I stood up and left. 6 months later, the foundation launched a new grant initiative. It was focused on education access for underfunded rural schools. Schools in communities that had been ignored for too long. Kids who needed someone to believe in them. I designed the program. I named it. And I ran it. The board asked me to take the lead, and I said yes. My name was on every document, every press release, every success story. The program was already changing lives. We had funded scholarships, built libraries, and trained teachers. And every time I signed a check or read a thank you letter from a student, I thought about them. About the family who had made me feel so small. They had called me a gold digger. They had laughed at my shoes and my background and my worth. But I didn't dig for gold. I built the mine. And now I was the one shining.